we had a great conversation in class today. The students asked some really challenging and probing questions. So insightful and revealing. And I just went back to the hotel room and cried. I felt so exposed. No, it was great fun. It was great fun. All right, so I want to read one poem from my first book, Totem, called Double Dutch. Double Dutch. The girls turning double Dutch bob and weave like boxers, pulling punches, shadowing each other, sparring across the slack cord, casting parabolas in the air. They whip quick as an infant's pulse, and the jumper, before she enters the winking, nods in time as if she has a notion to share, waiting her chance to speak. But she's anticipating the upbeat, like a band leader, counting off the tune they are about to swing into. The jumper stair steps into mid-air as if she's jumping rope in low gravity, training for a lunar mission. Airborne a moment long enough to fit a second thought in, she looks caught in the mouth bones of a fish as she flutter floats into motion like a figure in a stack of time-lapse photos thumbed alive. Once inside, the bells tied to her shoestrings rouse the gods who've lain in the dust since the Dutch acquired Manhattan. How she dances patterns like a dust-heavy bee retracing its travels in scale before the hive. How the whole stunning contraption of girl and rope slaps and scoops like a paddle boat. Her misted skin arranges the light with each adjustment and flex, now heather-hued, now sheen, light listing on the fulcrum of a wrist and the bare jutted joints of elbow and knee and the faceted surfaces of muscle, surfaces fracturing and reforming like a sun-tickled sleeve of running water. She makes jewelry of herself and garlands the ground with shadows. So that gives you a sense of the earlier work. I'm very much interested in visual, and I like to think of myself as a painterly poet because I can't paint. That's the closest thing I'll get to painting ever. So moving on to this book, I explained in class earlier, one of the preoccupations of this book is that I started writing this when I started working on a PhD, and someone told me that the PhD work would kill my creative writing. So I took that as a challenge, and I hope it's not necessary to know all this stuff, but just to give you a sense of what I'm after. This is called Written by Himself, and it's collaged from images from slave narratives. All slave narratives begin with the same three words, I was born. Written by himself. I was born in minutes in a roadside kitchen, a skillet whispering my name. I was born to rainwater and lie. I was born across the river where I was borrowed with clothespins, a harrow tooth, broadside sewn in my shoes. I returned, though it please you, through no fault of my own, pockets filled with coffee grounds and eggshells. I was born still and superstitious. I bore an unexpected burden. I gave birth. I gave blessing. I gave rise to suspicion. I was born abandoned outdoors in the heat-shaped air drifting like spirits in old windows. I was born a fraction and a cipher and a ledger entry. I was an index of first lines when I was born. I was born waist-deep, stubborn in the water, crying, ain't I a woman, and the brother I was born to this hall of mirrors, this horror story. I was born with a prologue of references, pursued by mosquitoes and thieves. I was born passing off the problem of the 20th century. I was born. I read minds before I could read fishes and loaves. I walked a piece of the way alone before I was born. So I have in my family, well, one of the other kind of preoccupations with this book is I'm interested in aggression, family aggression, small d domestic violence, right? So the kind of violence that just gets baked into a family and becomes this kind of static white noise of background stank. On my mother's side, I have aunts. On my father's side, I have an aunt. You're with me, right? Okay, all right. This is attachment, Atlantic City Pimp. Left of the @ sign, the email address was ethnically gendered with the nonce noun sista, which I have to confess I scoffed at, thinking it was from some self-discovering student of mine, before realizing it was my aunt who sent the JPEG from her cell phone. My aunt, who doesn't mind a bit of shell if it means getting all the crab meat, who is known to only leave behind enough of a tip to shame the waitstaff for their inattention. The subject line read AC Pimp, as if her painted nails and belly laugh made her expert in the fauna of pimps, a soul-stirred savant of things cold-blooded. As if she could divine an ivory-handled derringer holstered at his breast, icing the steel heart cognate to the gun, that twin ventriloquist of tinder and sulfur dust, that rhythmic and delicate organ pumping like a fist that has a knack for snake eyes and the superfluity of bruises that follow every spaghetti-strapped back talker's doubt. She must have thought she'd reached her brother, my father, who harbors like a gold molar a taste for robin egg and mauve pocket squares. A flourish of trim, a hand stitch, lapels check-striped and foreshortened like Tyrannosaurus arms, and ostrich print Stacey Adams to match. The modest feathered derby contrasting all those boas festooning street lamps and mailboxes. But my aunt is no mere expert. AC may have been a random tag, but that word, pimp, bore the import of all us do-wrong men. She was, in effect, signifying the kind of humor that waters the eye, the double talk, the shadow dialect. Like her spite-tinged smile at a bridal shower, her patina of derision enlivened the photo. My aunt, who refuses to settle for a man less Christian than she is, finds everywhere despicable men. Hence the dozens via email, the critique like a razor inside a roll of 20s, the currency of our vengeance economy. Perhaps there was an untroubled sea just beyond the garish casinos behind him, a stilt walker or a mime outside the frame, a carnival and boardwalk where the horizon would be, and a tour bus full of people waving. Out of all the images that might speak to something inside her, this was the one she found worth saving. So in honor of my Philadelphia roots, you may be familiar with the title, W.E.B. Du Bois's book, Philadelphia Negro. This is called Philadelphia Negro, but it's Philadelphia, comma, Negro. Do you know the Blue Angels? It's a, what do you call it? It's the jet, group of jet fighters that fly in formation. My father used to take me out to see them at the Air Force Base near Willow Grove. Okay, all right. That's why you read outside of Philadelphia. That's why you come home. Everybody gets the references. Philadelphia Negro. Alien-faced patriot in my father's mirrored aviators that reflected a mind full of cloud keloids, the contrails of blue angels in formation, miles above the campered fields of Willow Grove, where I heard them, clear as construction paper, slowly tearing. As they plumbed close enough, I could nearly see flyboys saluting the tiny flag I shook in their wakes. I visored back with pride, sitting aloft Dad's shoulders, my salute a reflex ebbing toward ground crews in jumpsuits, executing orchestral movements with light. The bicentennial crocheted the nation with the masts of tall ships and 12-foot Uncle Sams, but at year's end, my innocence dislodged like a powdered wig as I witnessed the first installment of Roots. The TV series appeared like a galleon on the horizon and put me in touch with all 12 angry tines of the fist pick my father kept on his dresser next to cufflinks and his Texas Instruments LED watch. I was not in the market for a history to pad my hands like fat leather mittens. A kind of religion to make sense of a past, mysterious as basements with upholstered wet bars and black light velvet panthers? Maybe. But as such a youngster, I thought every American a Philadelphia Negro. Blue-eyed soulsters and southpaws alike, getting strong now, mounting the art museum steps together like children, swept up in Elton's freedom from Fern Rock to Veterans Stadium, endorphins clanging like Liberty-themed tourist trolleys unloading outside the Penn Relays, a temporal echo, an offspring of Mexico City, where Tommy Smith and John Carlos made a human Kenara with the human rights salute, while my father scaled the Summit Avenue street sign at the edge of his lawn, holding a bomb pop that bled tricolor ice down his elbow as he raised it like Ultraman's beta capsule in flight from a police canine used to terrorize suspicious kids. Your dad would be mortified too if he knew you borrowed such overheard records of oppression to rationalize casting yourself as a revolutionary American fourth grader, even though, like America, your father never lifted your purple infant butt proudly into the swaddling of starlight to tell the heavens to behold the only thing greater than yourself. And like America, his fist only rose on occasion, graceful, impassioned, as if imitating Arthur Ashe's balletic serve, so that you almost forgot you were in its way. Do you guys know what Roots is? The show? So you remember the line? Well, so that comes out, the father says, yeah, that's probably, that and Chicken George, the only things I remember from it. Because they were so scarring. Okay, so there are a couple of series I call improvisations, and somebody asked me recently, well, what is an improvisation? You use this term so many times in your book. I said, I don't know. Sounds cool though, doesn't it? Improvisations. I don't know. I'm trying to formulate an intelligent kind of response, but that's my way of saying I don't have one yet. Quickly, the idea here was I started collecting what I thought would make really pompous and pretentious epigraphs for poems. But I didn't have any poems to put them with, so I had to write poems that responded then to the pompous epigraphs. So here you have it. Deleuze and Guattari. Making love is not just become... Oh, quickly. I got to tell you the story. This is so cool. So there are these Quaker parrots, right? So apparently, the story goes, there was a shipping container that somehow ruptured or burst open in like the 60s or something, and all of these parrots, these brightly colored parrots, get let loose over Brooklyn. And they survive generation after generation, and they're still there. You can still see them all over Brooklyn. I mean, you gotta look, but you'll find them, they're there. The analogy seemed to trigger, it seemed to suggest many analogies, in fact. Deleuze and Guattari. Making love is not just becoming as one or even two, but becoming as 100,000. Raise your eyes along the spires of Greenwood Cemetery, or stand on the ball fields of Brooklyn College in Hopperesque light. Quaker parrots will appear to you like the visions of St. Francis, lift the snatches of sound woven to make their voices, and call to you from their nests, a nation of cheer trumpets and conch shells, a frenzied population of twitching toes. They seduce us not simply with their tropical verve. Listen into the feathered shrubbery of their heat, their chattering lines from Emma Lazarus, their trading fours on salt peanuts, their mourning their cousin, the Carolina parrot, reduced to a flourish on ladies' headgear. Who flushed them from their ancestral skies of Argentina? What love sustained the awareness of their bodies, whether as chattel or deportees, such distance? And who speaks for this diaspora, heedless of empire's mundane cartography? If we ask why Brooklyn, we hear only our own reply. If not here, where? Then tease a final query from our minds like thread from a lawn chair, parroting Hillel, and if not now, when? Epicurus. The honor paid to a wise man is itself a great good for those who honor him. Sam Cooke reminds you how Old Man River just keeps rolling, and you begin to wonder what makes a river tick. So you go sit on Union Street Bridge to study the unruffled Gowanus Canal with its tempting reflections and perfect your knack for reading water's ohm through the clockwork of the air. And you think, it's like you, which is not much of a river, but wise enough water to hush your regrets for the bloated casualties of your myriad indiscretions, since the first African was made to scoop the marsh to irrigate Dutch farms, until this moment, when you see that you are that African, and you are the Gowanus, just as you are the baby whale, lost and barging so far along the canal you are blessed now and breaking, and love this one the Daily News will name Sludgy, whom you will birth still upon your bay at Red Hook, after the sewer spills a glum baptismal across his fontanelle, and children will stand around and amen the Coast Guard atop the fly-flecked carcass, preaching that wisdom bends light into the eye of the whale, where if you look close, children, you'll find the water bears a flower, and the flower bears your name. That was a tense time in New York. Everyone rooting for Sludgy to make it. Alas, Sludgy did not make it. Not many things survived the Gowanus Canal. So, and I don't think I mentioned earlier in class, I'm going to read a couple of poems from the series Marginalia. And this series, again, not this entirely necessary for you to know all this, but I'm thinking about the Abraham and Isaac story. And I'm also thinking about Kierkegaard, who thought about the Abraham and Isaac story. And so the sections are called problemas, and that's lifted from Kierkegaard. I like stealing from other writers. So I'll read a couple of sections from this. I finally friended my brother. It may be we will never speak again. Why speak when we have this crystal ball through which to judge one another's lives? I imagine this is what the afterlife will be like. I'm ghosts, we say, instead of goodbye. It is nearly July in Brooklyn, and already the fireworks from Chinatown warehouses are bursting in stellar fluorescence like tinsel-tied dreadlocks above the Bushwick tenements and the brownstone blocks of Bed-Stuy now littered with the skittering decollage of rappers exploded across blacktops and handball courts, playgrounds and sidewalks knuckled by tree roots. My neighbor's teenaged boys argued who possessed the greatest patriotism. Just as pit bulls chained to their fists imply their roughly domesticated manhood, they seek to demonstrate their patriotism with bottle rockets, spinners, petards, those household paraphernalia of war. The competition is vigorous, draws spectators and blood. When the smoke clears, no charges are filed. We neighbors waver distractedly a moment before tracing our paths back into our quiet homes. The Fulton Street food town is playing Motown, and I'm surprised at how quickly my daughter picks up the tune. And soon the two of us, plowing rows of goods steeped in fructose under light thick as corn oil, are singing "Baby, I Need Your Lovin'," unconscious of the lyrics' foreboding. My happy child riding high in the shopping cart as if she's cruising the polished aisles on a tractor laden with imperishable foodstuffs. Her cornball father enthusiastically prompting with spins and flourishes and the double barrel fingers of the gunslinger's pose. But we hear it as we round the rice and Goya aisle. That other music, the familiar exchange of anger, the war drums of parent and child. The boy wants what? To be carried? To eat the snacks right from his mother's basket? What does it matter? He's making a scene. With no self-interest beyond the pleasure of replacing wonder with wonder, my daughter asks me to name the boy's offense. I offer to buy her ice cream. How can I admit recognizing the portrait of fear the mother's face performs, the inherited terror of nonconformity, frosted with the fear of being thought disrespected by or lacking the will to discipline one's child? The boy's cries rising like hosannas as the mother's purse falls from her shoulder. Her missed step from the ledge of one of her stilted heels, passion loosed with each displaced hairpin, his little jacket bunched at the collar where she has worked the marionette. Later, when I'm placing groceries on the conveyor belt and it's clear I have forgotten the ice cream, my daughter tries her hand at this new algorithm of love, each word punctuated by her little fist. "Boy," she commands, "didn't I tell you?" My adorable child, angel. She's much older now, so I get a kick out of reading that poem when she's in the audience. Like, yes, you were a handful. That euphemism. At 13, I asked my father for a tattoo. I might as well have asked for a bar mitzvah. He said I had no right to alter the body he gave me. Aping what little of Marx I learned from the sisters down the street who wore torn black stockings with Doc Martens, I said I was a man because I could claim my body and the value of its labor. This meant I could adorn it or dispose of it as I chose. Tattoos, my father said, are like children. Have one, you'll want another. I knew there was a connection between the decorated body and reproduction. This was why I wanted a tattoo. Yet I reasoned, not in so many words, his analogy only held in the case of possession, i.e., I possess my body, but cannot possess my children. His laughter was my first lesson in the human Ponzi scheme of paternalism, the self-electing indenture to the promise of material inheritance, men claiming a hollow authority because simply their fathers had claimed a hollow authority. Knowing I had little idea as to what my proposed tattoo might resemble, my father sent me to my room to sketch it using the pastels he had given me for Christmas. Based on his critique, he said he would consider my request. but he had already taken the shine from my swagger. How can I beautify what I do not possess and call it anything but graffiti? Chris Rock says my first job is to keep my daughter off the pole. Whether or not I agree with him, I get his point. As a father myself, I now see every mutinous claim of independence as the first steps toward my sweet peas falling in with a bad crowd. Richard Pryor says we are bound to fuck up our kids one way or another. My father would split the difference. I made you, he'd say. I can unmake you and make another one just like you. Just like Warhol. Brilliant artist, my father. Thanks again for having me. Thanks, Lisa, Alan. Thanks, guys, for the fantastic introduction. Wishing well. Outside the Met, a man walks up, son tweaking the brim sticker on his starter cap, and he says, "Pardon me, old school," he says. "You know, is this a wishing well?" "Yes, son," I say sideways over my shrug. "Throw your bread on the water." I tighten my chest, wheezy as Rockaway beach sand, with the pull of faux smoke from my e-cig to cozy the truculence I hotbox alone, and I am at the museum because it is not a bar. Because he appears not to have changed them in days, I eye the heel-chewed hems of his pants and think, probably he will ask me for 50 cents any minute now. Wait for it. A smoke or something. Central Park displays the frisking transparency of autumn. Tracing paper sky, leaves like eraser crumbs gum the pavement. As if deciphering celestial script, I squint and purse off toward the roof line of the museum aloof as he fists 2 pennies from his pockets, mumbling, and then aloud, "My man," he says, "hey, my man, I'm going to make a wish for you too." I'm laughing now, "So what, you want me to sign a waiver?" He laughs along, and he say all that, he says, "but you do have to hold my hand and close your eyes." I make a starless night of my face before he asks, "Are you ready?" "Yeah, dog, I'm ready." "Sure?" "Sure, let's do this." His rough hand in mine inflates like a blood pressure cuff, and I squeeze back as if we are about to step together from the sill of all resentment and timeless toward the dream source of unneeding. The two of us hurtle, sharing the cosmic breast of plenitude, when I hear the coins blink against the surface and I cough up daylight like I've just been dragged ashore. "See now? You'll never walk alone," he jokes, and is about to hand me back to the day he found me in, like I was a rubber duck. And he says, "You got to let go." But I feel bottomless, and I know he means well, though I don't believe, and I feel myself shaking my head no, when he means let go his hand. Thank you. Should we, yeah.
I think Greg will take questions from.
I will now field questions from the audience. You down in front, please.
Why, thank you. My question is, how much of what we hear is from the original draft,
the first draft?
how much of it is from revision?
Very little of it is, well, I don't know. Take this last poem, Wishing Well. There's, I don't know if you can find it. On my website, I hate saying it, it's so corny. On my website, there is a copy of one of the original drafts, an early draft, handwritten draft of Wishing Well. And you can see that in that case, I mean, it's a narrative poem, so the poem depends on the story. So I know the story, all I have to do is figure out the kind of contours, the emotional contours of the relevance of the story. So in that case, the poem was kind of there in so it was already there in most of its shape. On the other hand, a poem like Written by Himself, which is a relatively to me, I suppose, short poem. You can see, not a full page, right? That started out with maybe 5 or 6 pages of work, and so a lot got cut and rearranged, and because it's a lyric poem, so it's about language, and so I have to cull through an awful lot of language to find the images and language that I want to stick with. So I guess it depends on the nature of the poem. Right? Is it a lyric poem? Is it a narrative poem? Is it a dramatic poem? A dramatic poem being one that kind of focuses on character and voice. Mm-hmm. Yes.
First, I just want to say thank you for reading.
Oh, thank you.
It's always special to hear the writers themselves read the poem out loud.
Thanks.
And I suppose my question is, it was very nice to hear, like, you read a poem from Totem, and seeing that's from the past, how would you say you have grown as a writer going into Digest and now becoming a Pulitzer Prize?
That's it's still very embarrassing to hear that. Yeah, actually, this is one of the things we were talking about today in class, and I think in the first book. So the way I characterize it is, in the first book, I was still trying to impress my teachers, and so and whenever you're trying to impress your teachers, it's a kind of hero worship, and you make the teachers out to be far more than they actually are, and so you're trying to impress this figment, this superhuman figment, and so in other words, I overshot considerably in a lot of the poems. It's not to say I disavow the poems. I stand by the work, but in the second book, in Digest, I think I'm writing more in this vein of a conversation in my own classroom, right? Where, and in my classroom, I hope the guys from today will attest, is very peer-like, right? There isn't I tried not to create a hierarchy in the room. We're all after the same thing, and has to figure out whatever the heck this literature thing is. And in that pursuit, it's less self-serving. There's less to prove. I'm not trying to prove something in the second book. There's another big difference, I think, in Digest, and that is the fact of my being a father, having children by the second book. So when one generally, I believe, and certainly in my case, has children, your relationship to the universe changes, in that, I'm not going to be around at some point. I have to realize that, I'm not so important anymore, and you start investing in, those who are going to carry forth, and so I think that, the sort of emphasis of ego is another shift. Yeah, hi.
I noticed that you had a lot of references to African-American writers, also some philosophers. I'm wondering who your literary influences are.
So, cutting to the chase, and probably because I just said this today, so it's easily accessible in my head, Whitman is probably the foundation, right? The base ingredient in the roux that is my poetry. After that, Hart Crane plays a big part. Hopkins, Gerard Manley Hopkins. and I wonder if this is even at all evident in the work, but Jory Graham is a big influence. Now that's in terms of the poetry. Now, obviously, my scholarly field is African American literature, so a lot of my thinking about identity and theoretical work, that all comes from that environment. Yes.
Thank you. So this sort of follows up on what you just said. And I know that you said that part of what got you working on the Poems of Digest was somebody telling you that embarking on a PhD would kill your creative drive. I mean, I'm sure we're all glad to say that that wasn't the case, obviously. And it seems also like a lot of what you have been reading in that, with that energy in that part of your life has prompted some of the poems here.
Certainly. Yeah.
But I guess I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit more about how those two modes of writing sort of sit side by side in your head.
Yeah.
They seem like, I mean, I guess I'm curious a little bit to hear about your experience doing academic writing or scholarly writing, and whether that's changed your voice in some way.
It has.
Beyond just giving you material.
Yeah. Well, it has, and one of the poems I didn't read was I didn't read any of either of the course descriptions or the rare book description, and these came out of the fact that I had all this academies kind of pushing at the lid, and I wanted to be able to, I want to have an excuse to make use of it. And the way I excused my kind of wallowing in academic language was to poke fun at it. It was a kind of self-mockery. But at the same time, I'm getting away with, actually employing all that stuff. I think I'm a bad scholar in that I inevitably get taken up by the language and distracted by the kind of shiny baubles of words, and the ideas tend to become secondary. But what does, I think, translate into this problem I wanted to solve was, how do I make concepts like the labor value of sex work? How do I make connect the notions of paternal or patriarchal ownership of children and women? How do I comment on these things without sounding like, kind of strident, right, and didactic? And so humor becomes another weapon in that arsenal, so the problem I want to solve is, or the challenge I create is, how do I find contexts that are not dependent on academic language, but convey the complexity of the theoretical, sort of underpinnings. And so I think that's the balance I'm trying to get at, is to make it accessible without speaking down to the reader or undercutting my reverence even for the level, the rigor of thought. You had a question? Yeah. No, that's a great question. I'm still asking that question. Yeah. So genres are, this is what we genres like gender identities, like racial identities are kind of what we fall into just because they work and it's how we all relate and we understand one another. And the one that seemed to allow me to do the most things I wanted to do, which was play with language mostly, was poetry. But now, as these guys mentioned, I'm writing nonfiction, and obviously in my scholarly work I do a lot of criticism and research. That was another point that just escaped me. I don't know, maybe it'll come back. Genres. I don't know, so I am trying to challenge the notion of genres and you know, but at the same time, I'm conscious of the fact that this is how we communicate, and I want to signal something that the reader can understand and kind of predict. Yeah. Hold on, was one in the back and then up here. Uh-huh. Both, actually, yeah. So sometimes I know there's something there and I don't quite know what it is, and I know that if I just keep writing through, then I'll trick myself into saying something, into revealing something, you know, of some meaning and hopefully risk. But in that poem, the first few drafts, I was. And I hate to say this because poetry is not journalism and it's not nonfiction, although it is truth anyway. I hate to say this really happened because that's irrelevant to the fact of the poem, but this really happened, and this guy walks up, and that the whole exchange occurs, and I just walked away thinking that was just weird. And so I write the poem, and I'm trying to convey how weird that guy was. And the whole time I'm drafting the poem, I'm like, that guy. And the poem's not quite taking off until I realize, oh, I'm the wacko. Oh. I'm the one who's desperately in need of fellowship and connection, and right. And so it takes some doing and working through. I guess the point I do want to make is, I say this often, that the muse is an awful writer. Do not trust the muse to write for you, right? It's craft. You have to. There is inspiration, then let that occur. But this stuff you have to write over and over and over again to bring it into some structure. And I write so obsessively, in a repetitive way, over and over again, that I use it as my practice of creating the context, creating the situation in which inspiration is possible, right? So I don't sit and wait for inspiration. I have to actively make myself vulnerable to it. And I've come to begin to know the signals when there's something. So if I say, here's a big one. If I find myself saying, oh, I can't write that, I know, all right, we're on to something. I got to sit here and figure out what's terrifying, what's scaring me about this. So that's, finding strategies for revealing inspiration is more the process.
You talked about nonfiction writing and journalism and stuff like that, and obviously that's about communicating an idea.
Yeah.
But while with poetry like yours, there's a lot of emotional ideas and imagery and stuff like that. And well, my question is like word choice. It's clear that poetry,
Mm.
word choice is a vehicle to communicate things. And what I like listening to poetry is like that, this emotional kind of roller coaster.
Mm.
But then you, like specifically, will put in like a very nice word, and it's a word I don't hear very often,
Yeah.
something like that, and that just gives me so much more like value to the poem. So my question is, are you writing it straight out, and you obviously have like a large lexicon, so you go, I'm going to put this word here, or do you ever find yourself saying like, I really like this word for this poem, and so you kind of like try to reverse engineer it into the poem.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do a lot of reverse engineering. I definitely do that a lot. But in terms of the difference in registers that you find hopefully in most of my work, comes from me coming to the poem. So I leave my theory and gender course, and I come to the draft of this poem, and I have that head on and that vocabulary, and I write through, and that all gets baked into the poem. I come to, 2 weeks later, I come back to the poem after having watched SpongeBob with my kids, and that gets baked into the poem. And so there are all these levels, all these registers, rather, of diction. And I'm not one to advocate smoothing out the poem. I mean, there is value in that, and there are certainly poets who write a very consistent and smooth-toned poem that are fantastic. But I like the rich kind of cacophony, the noise, the collision of discourses, and so what you're seeing is like it's kind of like a wall where it's been wallpapered over many times, and so it's stripped off in this place, and you can actually see the brick over here, and it's been painted over there, and it's still the same wall, but it's got all these levels. Yeah. Yeah.
Has how you read poetry changed over the years, and what was like the first poem you read that really like hit you?
It was, I don't even know if anybody reads Patty Ann Rogers anymore, but there was a Patty Ann Rogers poem. I think she's a Canadian poet. And it gestured toward the reader, so it kind of broke that wall. It implicated me. So it's I don't even remember what the poem was, but I know it was about something, and I'm reading it and following it, and then it says, "Hey, you." And I went, "Ah!" You can't do that. I'm safe on this side of the poem. I'm safe on this side of the world. The poem can't reach out. And that just thrilled me. And so, yeah, and there was another poem. There was a Reginald Shepherd poem also that I read where I had no idea what this guy was talking about. But it was just so dazzling. It was just this lyric thing. It was just the language was like, what is going on? This is not a world I recognize in any way. But this is English. I know this language, but it's working in ways that I didn't know. I had never imagined making the language work. So, and I said this before, I'm trying to get back to that moment. And it's kind of like, chasing a high. So you want to get back to, I know it's an awful metaphor, I'm sorry. But I want to get back to that, and it's not possible, right? It's gone. But I want to get back to that originary, that innocent moment of shock and surprise and expansion. So in answer to your question, my reading, I make, as much as my reading is critical anymore, and it's very difficult for me to enjoy a poem because I'm always looking at it you know, in terms of its structure and how it's making things happen. But I guess when a poem can kind of capture my imagination, then I'm really impressed. Last one, yeah. One more. Yeah, thanks. Yes?
And I'm sure it varies from poem to poem. I think you could have touched on this a little bit, but how do you determine the form that your poems will take? Do you play with meters? Do you have like a rhythm in mind? Do you go by
Yeah.
color, or I guess how do you determine form and structure?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the poem, and I approach both as separate projects in the poem. So, in some sense, we say the poem, the content will dictate the form, or the form will dictate the content, and you know they have this symbiotic relationship. But there are some poems when I say, well, I'm playing with the guzzle form, and I might have this content, this poem over here. Another thing, we were talking about failed poems earlier, and the poem may not be, this poem may not be working, but I'm really excited about this form, and it may not be a guzzle, it may be a course description, it may be a rare book description, a catalog description, right? And so I'm very interested in all kinds of genres, forms. And if I have two things that may not be working, I'll just smash them together and see what happens. And in that, then, that'll generate new ideas, and the poem may go in a completely different direction, but I tend to Frankenstein a lot. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.